is the Submissive CEO. Power under God. Leadership under authority. Building empires through obedience. Strong in business. Surrendered in spirit. Walking by faith, not by trends. Let's go.
Welcome to the Submissive CEO. I'm your host, Ludgy. This is the podcast for entrepreneurs and for people who feel called to build something. Businesses, wealth, influence, all while remaining under God's authority. Or at least trying to. All right. Welcome back, everybody. So I have been reflecting on something lately, and honestly, it really did kind of check me, and I wanted to share. So sometimes we think obedience to God is simple. You either did what he said or you didn't. But there is this middle space that we do not talk about, and we do not address it enough. And that is partial obedience. And the truth is, partial obedience is still disobedience. Okay. So now I know that sounds a little harsh, but stay with me. Okay. And I know most of us are not waking up in the morning with a conscious decision planning to disobey God. And it's always just so much more subtle than that. And sometimes we do most of what God said, but we skip the part that is uncomfortable, the part that we do not want to do. And we follow the instructions that we like, so it's very easy to quietly ignore the part that requires a little more trust, a little more faith. And if we're honest, these things show up a lot in how we work, how we lead, and how we make decisions. So I will tell you, there was a period of time where, for myself anyways, everything on the outside looked great. My calendar was full. I was booked and busy. Okay. Opportunities were coming. People were encouraging me. It was great. But internally, I felt a little scattered. I felt a little lost. Like I was moving a lot. I was doing a lot, but something felt off. I don't know if you've ever felt like you are just doing a lot, but at the same time, you are not getting anything done. You are not accomplishing anything. That is how I was feeling. And eventually I had to stop and ask myself, a question. And it was a little uncomfortable, but the question was not, can I handle all of this? It was, did God actually ask me to do all of this? Because sometimes we are not outright disobeying God. We're just adding a bunch of extra things that he never asked us to carry. And I am queen of the extra. I will add on extra things. If I told you guys how many business ideas I can come up with in a day, you would absolutely think that I am some sort of, crazy maniac or something, because I can come up with something every single day. And I don't know if that's a blessing or a curse, but every single day. And so, all right. So back to the topic at hand. Yeah, we just be adding extra things that God never asked us to hold or to carry. And so, of course, it's going to feel heavy. And before long, you are busy, you're tired, your calendar starts looking like a whole CVS receipt. It is just long for no reason. And you are opening it up and thinking, why is this so long? And how did I even get here? What are all these things on my calendar? And the crazy part is a lot of the things on that list are technically good things, but good things and God things are not always the same. So I will tell you, this is not a new struggle. It's not new to our generation or to our time frame. Okay. So there's a story in the Bible that shows this really clearly, and I just want to reference it. And I'm going to remind you all again that I am not a pastor and no theology background. I just love God and try to read a little word every now and then, see what I can get from it. So in the Old Testament, Israel had a king named Saul. Okay. And God had given Saul a very specific assignment to do in battle through the prophet Samuel. So Samuel was the prophet that God used to speak instructions to the king and to let him know what his desires were. So in this situation, God gave Saul very clear directions about what he was supposed to do in a battle. Not vague guidance, not a general idea. He literally gave him strategy and clear instruction. Now, for your reference, this is 1 Samuel 15, if you want to look this up for yourself. So Saul goes out and he does most of what God said. He ends up keeping some of the best animals and the spoils from the battle, the very things that God had specifically told him to destroy and not to keep. So when Samuel comes to confront him about it, Saul starts to over-explain himself, and he's like, well, the animals are for sacrifice. So this is for God, so it has to be good. Basically, he's trying to frame it in a spiritual way. But Samuel responds with that line that, you hear so often, and it still kind of hits today. And he says, to obey is better than sacrifice. So, in other words, God would rather have your simple obedience than your impressive explanation. And when you sit with that for a minute, you start to realize this shows up in our lives and in our businesses a lot more than we think, especially if you are someone who's capable, driven, and used to trying to figure things out on your own. Because when you are that kind of person, opportunities will always show up. So the question isn't, can you do it? The real question becomes, were you supposed to do it, or are you supposed to do it? So let's talk about a couple of ways that partial obedience can show up in your life or in your business, especially when you're trying to build something and you're trying to grow something. So one of the ways that I recognize in myself anyways, is that sometimes we make the decision first and then ask God about it later. So an opportunity will show up. Someone says to you, oh, you would be perfect for this thing. Or, somebody hits your DMs or an email in your inbox, and before you can even think about it, you are already saying yes. And then later on, when things have settled, you are praying and saying, Lord, please bless this. But praying after you decide is kind of like asking for directions after you already drove down the wrong road. And at that point, the GPS is like, ma'am, we should have had a discussion a lot earlier than this. And now we have to reroute. So this happens all the time, even for my aspiring entrepreneurs. You say yes to every opportunity because you're afraid of missing something. Every, hey, can I just pick your brain phone call, or every ministry project, every extra responsibility at work, because in your mind, you're possibly thinking, what if this is the door God is opening? What if this is what he's going to use to bless me and I don't want to miss it? But the problem is you never actually stop to ask him. And before long, your calendar is packed, your energy is drained, and your time with God starts getting squeezed into whatever space you have left over. And that kind of leads me into the point of, we need to be able to consult God before we make these decisions. Okay. So another way I have realized this in myself, partial obedience, that is sometimes I start to measure obedience by outcomes instead of instructions. And what I mean by that is, if something is working, I automatically assume it must be God. I am infamous for being like, oh, look at God. This is God. Look how God has blessed me, or look at God is showing up for me. But at the minute something starts to slow down, I start to question things. And I don't know, that is our human nature. But the soonest things start to not go the way we thought it should have went, we start to question. But sometimes, the most obedient season of your life will look very quiet on paper. You might be in a job where God asks you to stay and learn for a season. You don't know what those skills are going to be used for in whatever plan he has for you. So meanwhile, you're looking, everyone around you is launching businesses, starting podcasts, building platforms, and you're sitting here thinking, okay, so I'm just here. When is it my turn? But that's okay, because obedience doesn't always have to look impressive. Sometimes obedience looks like staying where God placed you until he says to move, and sometimes it's just recognizing that there's a lesson to be learned in whatever the situation you're currently in. And sometimes you got to fall back and ask, think to yourself, what was the last thing that God told me? Ask yourself, what was the last instruction that I got? And that will help to really have you start thinking about things in a different way. And have you start thinking about the way that you obey God and if it lines up with the way he has called us to obey him. So the last thing I want to share, or the last example that I want to share anyways, is sometimes I start sacrificing my time with God for productivity. Like I said, sometimes I am booked and I am busy, and that will affect my spiritual life. Like I'm doing a lot for God, but not spending much time with God. Showing up for people, for clients, for church, for the internet, the algorithm, but I am not slowing down long enough to ask, Lord, what do you actually want me to do next? And that can definitely start to cause a lot of burnout in people because you're carrying a lot, but you're not being refilled. I've had moments where opportunities came my way, and instead of praying about them, I kind of just disappeared, full ghost mode. And you can call that selective obedience or, maybe good boundaries. But at the end of the day, I was just overwhelmed and exhausted. I was spiritually exhausted. My soul was tired. And if you have ever experienced your soul being tired, you know exactly what I mean. There is no amount of sleep, rest, relaxation that will solve that. That is a deeper level. And sometimes God is like, hey, you need to sit down for a minute. So if you are listening to this and thinking, okay, she's talking about me, I might be, but I'm also talking about myself. So no judgment here. But a little bit of good news is that the solution isn't complicated. It starts with just slowing down. And if you know me personally, God has slowed me down a couple of times in the last couple of years, one way or another. So one of the ways that I'm learning to do this is to just building a pause into my decisions. So before I say something or I agree to something or a contract or anything like that, I give myself a little bit of space, even if it's just 24 hours. And I just, hey, let me pray on it and check my capacity. I can get back to this. You do not have to give people an immediate response as soon as they ask you for something. It actually makes you a little bit more desirable if you tell them, hey, you know what, I'm going to get back to you on this. And you take a little bit of time to reflect. And in your reflection, you can ask God, hey, God, is this from you? And if it is, what does obedience actually look like here? What do you want me to do next? And he will answer you. He will answer you. God answers us in many ways, but he will answer you. Another helpful step that I find is asking God what he wants me to build in this season. I have a tendency to get ahead of myself. I have planned the next 20 years of my life in my mind, okay? And sometimes we just do too much. Ask God what he wants you to do now, not your entire future, but just this season. Look at the roles you carry, the projects you're working on, or even the ideas that you have in your notes app, and ask honestly, did God ask me for this, or did I add this myself? Because the truth is, God doesn't need our explanations. He just wants our obedience. And I'm not doing this to sound like success is the enemy or, money is the root of all evil, things like that. Success isn't the enemy. Ambition isn't evil. But when we start running ahead of God, even good things can turn into unnecessary pressure. And that's just something I wanted to share that's been on my heart. It's something that I've been dealing with recently, and I wanted to put it out there in case anybody else is experiencing these types of things. So if this episode spoke to you in any way, follow it, subscribe, share with another entrepreneur or anybody else who's trying to build with God and not just for God. Before we close, let me just do a quick prayer for you. I always want to leave you guys blessed. Again, not a pastor, so forgive me if my prayers do not, meet what you think they should be. But these are my honest prayers, outpouring of my heart to God on your behalf and on mine. So, Lord, thank you for every person listening right now. You see the ideas they're carrying, the responsibilities on their shoulders, and the desire in their heart to build something meaningful. I pray that you would give them clarity where there's confusion, peace where there is pressure, and courage to follow your instructions, even when it doesn't look impressive to the world. So if there is anything they're holding on to that you didn't ask for, give them the wisdom and humility to release it. And if there's something you placed in their heart that they've been afraid to step into, Give them the boldness to walk in obedience. Help us to build lives and businesses that honor you. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, you guys, thank you for spending this time with me today. I pray that you are blessed in everything that you're doing, and I'll see you in the next episode of The Submissive CEO.
This is the Submissive CEO.